Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Adobo and Avocados. My name is Marie.
And I'm Nicole. Hello, everyone.
Hello. We're back with another episode. So last week we spoke with Rafaela Acevedo about her career, in tech and what her experience has been like creating, a startup. So this week, Nicole and I figured, why don't we talk about something different, so something that we haven't really spoken about before, but I think we have a lot of shared experiences about it. So today we're going to be talking about intersectionality. Um, I only found out about this term like from you, Nicole. So maybe you can explain to us, what is intersectionality before we start, this whole episode, I guess.
Yeah, sure. So, this is a topic that I relate to strongly. Basically, we each have identities that we feel belong to us. So, it could be like being a woman, for example. But the intersectionality is about the idea that when you have more than one identity, sometimes when they overlap, that affects the way that we relate to the world, or it affects how we experience the world in ways different from, just being a woman. Or for example, you could be being a woman
Mm-hmm.
and being black are two different identities. However, for some people those identities overlap. So the whole idea of intersectionality is that being a black woman comes with its own unique considerations and experiences that could be different, or separate from just being black or just being a woman. So sometimes when we have a lot of these overlapping identities, it can be kind of hard to navigate and explain yourself to other people as well who maybe don't share those.
Yeah. I think it's a really great way to think that we as human beings are very complex. We identify with like a lot of like different, identities. Like, for example, I identify as a woman, I identify as, as an Asian woman, but at the same time, I also identify as an immigrant Asian woman who now lives in Europe. I also identify as, as a single parent. So there's so many attributes, or there's so many qualities that I can't just be fitted in like one checkbox. It's like a combination of both, or
Yeah,
more than,
maybe maybe we can talk a little bit about that, because I know we both identify as Asian women. And I think that being an Asian comes with its own stereotypes and experiences, and being a woman does as well. But being an Asian woman is like a whole other thing.
yeah.
It's both and more.
Yeah,
I
and with this Asian as well, because like living like Asia is like a really massive continent. So if we think about like the different like groups, there's the East Asian, the South Asian, and then us like Southeast Asian. So even if like we all identify as Asian women, there are certain attributes that we don't relate to people who are East Asian, or people who are South Asian. Like there's still some like big differences. Yeah, I would say.
Yeah. So, for example, I think that there's actually a lot of Asian representation in movies and TV shows. I think that, because of a lot of immigrants being in the US and other countries, I think it's not uncommon to see Asians portrayed in a realistic way. However, I do think that if you bring intersectionality into it, I think Asian women could use some better representation in movies. It
Yeah.
always I'm always frustrated, because it seems like in movies Asian women are either like these docile, submissive women who are just like, yes, whatever you say, we're just here to, look pretty and be trophies. Or on the other end of the spectrum, they're like these femme fatales who are
Yeah.
rebellious and like
Yeah.
no kung fu or something.
Yeah.
And you sort of don't see just like a normal Asian woman who's neither extreme.
Yeah.
And I think that's an example of how something is like that. Something exists for a stereotype exists for Asian women that isn't really something that comes up for Asians or for women.
Yeah, it's just very distinct because like growing up, like watching movies, movies with different like Asian women, like they almost always play like this certain character, especially if it's like abroad. So to me, like I don't necessarily like 100% relate to what that character is portraying, but from the outside world, that's what everyone thinks of, like how an Asian woman should behave or should act, and that does have an impact as well on how others perceive us.
Yeah, I don't think that Asian men have the stigma of like speaking out or getting angry and being told like, oh, wow, that's not an Asian thing to do. And, it's kind of taboo to say that to just to a woman. But I don't know, it's kind of like I feel like Asian women are held to a different standard. And when you're outspoken as an Asian woman, it's a bit like, whoa, that's really different.
Yeah.
So that's an example of an intersection between race and ethnicity. I
Yeah.
mean, sorry, race and well, ethnicity and gender. But there are other different minority groups. I was wondering, maybe I can actually share something, an
Yeah.
intersection of gender and sexual orientation. So let me just quickly share that. Okay, so this is something about oops, yeah, it's still there. All right, so this is about how people the kinds the percentages of people who experience violence from their partners, and it kind of breaks it up into different categories. But what's interesting is that if you just do it based on gender,
Yeah.
so it's like all the women and all the men, I mean the women report a slightly higher one, but when you look at each one, they're not it's not a huge jump. Or if you look at it across sexual orientation, between like bisexual, homosexual, and heterosexual, the differences are not as distinct except
Mm.
for bisexual women.
Yeah.
So this is a clear case where being a bisexual woman makes you significantly more likely to experience violence from your partner, um, rather than if you had been, another sexual orientation or gender. This is this is what we were talking about, like how the intersection maybe exacerbates a certain effect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I'm guessing as well, like if someone, reports, for example, this type of violence, like from, some people's mind is just, oh, let's think of it like as some, between men or women. But then actually there's like a wider, you know, like other groups as well, between like a specific genders that needs to be considered. And I think this is what intersectionality really like highlights, that you can't just um be pulled like singularly into like one specific attribute, because there's a lot of like other factors that also put this into play.
Yeah. And this can happen as well for like gender and religion, because a lot of religions have very distinct gender roles, and that maybe you can't apply something to an entire religion, but you can apply something to a religion and a gender,
Mhm.
usually women.
Yeah, but it's really sort of expanding this view that it's not just about like gender anymore. Like you said, there's also like the religion aspect, the ethnicity aspect, even like your personal circumstances, or like, your level of education. There's also other, factors, because I think when Kimberly Crenshaw first started introducing intersectionality, it was really about, tackling like the oppression that like African women, that African American women, face, that, they also face like other types of, oppression that are unique to their experience. But I think now, it's really evolve into like this, more of like, looking into someone else's experience like a unique way. Like, you can't just say that, oh, everyone experienced this because, they're a woman, or, everyone experienced this because, hey, you're Asian. So it's not, like similar experiences. So it's all about, having that understanding that your experiences is unique, your experience is valid, and it probably won't be the same as, my experience. And that's also valid. It's more like understanding, how to be respectful of each other's experience.
Yeah, I went to the US for university, and I remember I was feeling a bit homesick. I was like 18, so I
Mhm.
was a baby basically, and I didn't really know how to live on my own.
Mm.
And I looked at the Filipino club and I joined it in school, and I thought like, "Oh, these are people who are going to get it. These are Filipinos in the US." And then they even had a big, most of them actually were women. So I was like, oh, this is great. People will immediately get where I'm coming from. And I got in and I realized they're second generation immigrants.
Oh
There
my
is a
god.
huge difference between being a first generation immigrant and being a second generation one. Because when you're second generation, you grew up in that
Yeah.
country. You know the culture and the language with a facility that, a non native speaker can't hope to match. And I thought it was so funny because they were so enthusiastic about Filipino culture, but they never actually lived it. And so I still felt like an outsider in that. And that was because there was another dimension of my identity that I didn't take into consideration.
It's so funny that you said that. So when I was at uni, I I did the same thing. So I found a club. I remember it was called ASEAN Club. Um, and the people who, were in the booth, so they're both Filipinos. So I approached them, but yeah, like you said, they're already like, they're already living here, or they've been here for, so long, probably like when they were like young, that, they've really ingrained like the British culture, like they have the British accent. So um in a way it was great, because like at first I was thinking, oh, hey, this is a group that, I might like, be really comfortable with. But I remember like I just like drifted like slowly from that group, because there's some activities that I don't really relate on like participating. And there's some as well that the conversations, like some I just couldn't relate at all, because it was like, stuff that like have happened, like, when they're growing up, all those things, and I just can't really relate. So yeah, it's really interesting that you brought that up, because I've also sort of like tried to find that, group when, yeah, I was at uni.
Yeah, I'm glad that it wasn't just me.
Yeah.
I think also that when you say intersectionality, there is a bit of a connotation that it's going to be about discrimination. I think
Mhm.
it can be. I think some intersecting identities can cause some people to be more marginalized than others. But I think the whole idea of intersectionality is just about thinking of identity in a more nuanced way.
Yeah.
It's not always highlighting, how you're being discriminated against, but in this case it was like us failing to account for one part of our identities that maybe if we had done that, then we could have gone in with, more realistic expectations or
Mm.
something. But you mentioned earlier that you are a single parent. How does that come into play for you?
Yeah, I think um it it has that perception. So when I, don't know a lot of, people, and then suddenly like I get to know them, they have that assumption already that because I have a daughter with me, that I'm still together, like, with my daughter's dad. And having to explain that that is not the case, it can be quite a tricky thing to like navigate. And it's again something that I don't really relate much, because like, the mothers that I talk to whenever I do like the school run like with my daughter, like they're all married, they're all like with their partners. So that's again something that, like, one of those things that I find hard to relate with. And especially being Filipino, I don't know a lot of Filipina women and moms who are who has been separated like with their partner. So again, it's about having that unique experience that I think it's valid, but yeah, it's just hard to, I guess, relate that like with other people, because growing up, and you probably have like seen this, like divorce is a big no-no in the Philippines. It's one of the countries that doesn't really allow divorce. And if this probably happened when I was in the Philippines, I would I would be seen like differently. Whereas in here, it's more accepting. So yeah, it does play on, I guess, some of like my experience uniquely, because again, I don't really know any other Filipino parent who's been separated. Maybe there's a few people there, but not like within the people that, yeah, I really know.
Yeah, and I think this is also an overlap with religion, right? Because that is the basis of divorce being illegal in the Philippines, is
Mm-hmm.
that there's this idea that you mate for life no matter what. And
Yeah.
I know I have a friend who is separated, not technically divorced. She's been working on getting her marriage annulled for a very long time, and it's not easy, and she's a lawyer too.
Oh wow.
So yeah, I think like in your case, you're already being a female divorced single parent. That's one thing. Well, actually it's three things. But on top of that, when you add being Filipino, that
Mm-hmm.
changes the mixture, because
Yeah.
suddenly there's like this element of religion and culture and social stigma that you're putting into that pot, that
Yeah.
maybe the other ones, just being a divorced single mom, maybe that doesn't really adequately express.
Yeah. I think as well, this is where um putting, like, so for example, like with work, I remember when I started working with K6 and Grafana, I remember I was very upfront of my social situation, that hey, there's probably days where you see my daughter, because I share like parenting days with her dad. So there will be days where you'll probably hear less from me, because I'll be busy like sorting her out. So I think because of my intersection of like these different attributes, I feel like I have to be really upfront and honest about it, just to manage everyone's like opinion and expectation. Because um the one thing that probably most of us do is, and this is one of those type of bias, is whenever you see someone who has a child, like your first thought is, okay, like where's the partner, like. And that's something that maybe like not is not always going to be applicable to, everyone's cases. So that's how I felt when, I've started this new role, just to, manage expectations that, hey, I might be, a bit busy, like, some days. And this is why I think bringing your most authentic self to work really helps.
That's so true. I think that one of the hardest things about having intersecting identities is that because you're different, you're more unique than maybe the average person could be. Um, there's this need to explain yourself to a degree that maybe you wouldn't normally explain. Um, like it would be weird if you weren't, a divorced single mom, that maybe it would be a little bit weird to have to explain the situation, to have to explain, whether you have a husband, or that he's the father of your child. That's a weird thing to explain. But because you are in this situation, suddenly that is something you have to come out of the gate, meet people, and be
Yeah.
like, by the way, let
Yeah.
me just tell you, which is so weird, right? Like, it makes I'm saying this not because I think what you said was weird, but like, I've felt this too, where I feel like I'm oversharing, right? But if I don't say it, then I can't. So an example of this is, when people ask me, where are you from, and I
Yeah.
legitimately don't know how to answer. And it's impossible. I mean, I could lie. That's the easiest. I could lie, and then I'll give you one response.
Yeah.
But any other questions after that are
Yeah.
going to be complicated unless I just make the whole thing up.
Yeah.
Because for me, like, nationality and ethnicity and residence and even like language and culture, those are all
So
different
different.
for me.
Yeah.
Um, it's really hard for me not to give the whole story, because I feel like I have to, so that people really understand. So, for
Yeah.
example, if I was going to give the simplest answer possible, if someone asks me where I'm from, and let's say I'm at a convention or something, I would probably respond with where I came from before then, like where I was living before then, which might have been Portugal.
Mm-hmm.
And then what if they start talking in Portuguese? Then I'll
Yeah.
be like, okay, well, I don't speak Portuguese that well
Yeah.
because I wasn't born there, and I don't even spend most of my time there. And then I have to explain, like, oh, I actually live in the Netherlands part of the time. And then it's like, oh, but I'm not Dutch by birth or ethnicity. I moved,
I like.
and then
Yeah.
you just have to explain so much. And by the end of it, it's like, I don't know, I just think, do you have 5 minutes? Because I
Yeah. We
kind of
need to
need to
grab a
explain
cup of
it
coffee
all.
while we talk about this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it is very, like, it is hard for me to just choose one. I mean, to say that I'm from Portugal, that's not, it doesn't feel right. It feels like I'm lying or telling a half truth. But the truth is that my identity is really complicated. So the full answer is, where am I from? I'm from Portugal, but before that Netherlands, or at the same time the Netherlands, because I live in both. And
Mm-hmm.
then before that Australia, and then the US, and then the Philippines. And
Yeah.
now maybe you'll start to understand
Yeah.
that, like, all of these countries have had a great deal to do with who I am and my background. But that's like, to have to say that to someone you have just met, who probably
Yeah.
thinks you're like sharing way too much about yourself. That's really daunting.
I know. I feel the exact same thing. And, maybe I'll give an example that's more related to like the work that we're in. So every time, we have like conferences, just meetups, whether it's, virtual or online, like sometimes I have to like explain, like, especially if they've asked me, to do a talk, like the days that I have my daughter with me. And then I would say, oh, can I actually do it on Thursday or Friday? And then they would ask why. And then I'll be like, oh, because those are the days I don't have my daughter with me because, she'll be with her dad. So it just feels like, am I oversharing? to someone that, I don't really know, like, oh, they now know that, I'm not with, like her dad, would that, portray something like negatively? But I feel like I have to, because if I don't, then that's going to be more difficult for me to manage if I do a conference on a day that I have her, especially with a younger, child. So I 100%, completely understand, like, there are things that we need to overshare just to, you know, really give an answer, like, that they would understand.
Yeah, or I don't know if you feel the same way, but I get a lot when because when I speak at a conference or when I do a YouTube video, it's almost always in English.
Mm,
And because of that, I get mistaken for a native English speaker or an American or whatever. And it's not something that I would introduce myself as. Like, I wouldn't say, "Hi, how are you? By the way, I'm not American, I'm whatever," but when it's mentioned, when people are like, "Oh yeah, us Americans," and I'm like, I'm not American," not that not that it's insulting, but it's not true.
yeah.
That's not who I am. And there are a lot of things like that occur as part of work that someone just mentions, and you have to be like, "Oh, actually, I don't identify as that."
Mhm.
Can be really scary to put up your hand and say that. But if you don't, I don't know, it feels not authentic.
Yeah. Um, let's maybe talk about one, another intersectionality when it comes to, us being like Filipinos, so our ethnicity. I'm wondering if you've come across some examples where you've been portrayed as, oh, are you this person because you're, from the Philippines. Because I remember, I had an experience, and this is probably why when someone asks like, where do you work, I just say I work in tech. But if I try to explain in more detail like what I do, I feel like, oh, we need like, at least 10 minutes like for me to explain. But I remember when I was with Gabby, so my daughter, we were at the park, we were playing, and then I saw another Filipino woman, with a child. And it really took me by surprise because she asked me like instantly, oh, which hospital do you work in? And I,
Oh,
I just had
wow.
to say that, oh, I don't work, in hospitality. I work in tech. So I don't know if you've, encountered some examples of like being portrayed as, one thing just because you are Filipino.
Yeah, I mean, I don't it's hard to tell sometimes. I don't know if it was because I was Filipino or because I was a woman or Asian or whatever. But I have gone into meetings with like a mentor who I was working with, who was my boss. But I've gone in and somebody has said like, "Oh, I didn't know we could bring our assistants. I should have brought mine too to take notes." And I'm like, just because I take notes doesn't mean I'm his assistant.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah,
and
I do get I have gotten that. Luckily those instances are few and far between.
yeah. But like you said, you wouldn't know if that was it because I was, I'm a woman, was it because, I'm Asian or like I'm Filipino. So, you can't really tell which attribute caused that. Yeah.
I also got a job offer because I was Filipino, and
Mm.
a Filipino woman in particular. It was something to do with like it was they with the NGOs, the
Mm.
non-governmental organizations in the Philippines, and they wanted someone who was also Filipino to be able to relate, but they also wanted a woman because it was in loosely in the fashion industry and whatever. And I did not know initially that was what had pushed me over the line. And then I
Mhm.
thought like, is this something that I'm comfortable with, because it wasn't like they were just choosing people because they like that combination. They did have reasons. At the same time, I personally decided that I wasn't that comfortable not getting a job, not being offered the job on merit alone.
Mm-hmm.
And so I actually ended up turning down that job. Not saying that it would have been wrong to, but it just something didn't feel right for me.
Yeah. Yeah, because it sort of affirms, some type of unconscious bias that, maybe you know you are, offered this job just because you shared like a similar like attribute, with someone from like the hiring, panel. So um we can maybe talk about like, some of the benefits that, intersectionality can provide, and why people need to know about it. So like one of them being is, yeah, it can reduce, a lot of people's unconscious bias, because um if you are more aware of, each person's unique experience, then you can probably try and be respectful of their experience, and rather than like reaffirming, certain like prejudices, or like stereotypes that you have against like this person.
Yeah, I think it can also make you just a more empathetic person and a better team player, because, like we said, there's some things that people assumed, and when they said it, we had to be like, "Oh, okay, here I go. I'm oversharing." You
Yeah.
know, if people were generally more aware of that, I'm sure that they would try not to put people in that position. And I think it would be a much more comfortable environment, because sometimes I don't feel like sharing everything, and to a stranger, like right away.
Yeah. I guess as well. So I've already mentioned that, one one experience that I had to portray sometimes is like I have to be like sometimes too honest about my situation. So to some people that can be too much, like to some that might be, okay. So I think this is where, yep, intersectionality can play an important factor, because you understand better why that person might be, oversharing, because they just want to, present like all the valid reasons why, they feel that way.
Yeah, and I think it's up to every person, right, to decide where those lines are. Like, I think that people would accept it if, like, even if you didn't explain, right? If we just saw your daughter on video calls or whatever, I would like to think that nobody would, be angry or
Mhm.
whatever. But it is also for you, right? Like, I think when we share, it might be oversharing for others, but at least from my point of view, I feel like I want people to know this about me. I want people to have the context for me. And sometimes it's more about me feeling understood than it is about explaining something.
Yeah, totally agree with that. Maybe the next topic that we can talk about is, how is this, relevant to tech? How is this relevant to our roles as, developer advocates? What can we learn from intersectionality?
So I think there was a time when people with intersecting identities were rare or were unique. I think that is becoming less and less the case, because it's getting a little bit easy. The borders are coming down in most parts of the world, which is a good thing. And
Mhm.
so it's becoming easier to move, to migrate, to mingle with people from different walks of life and cultures and whatnot. And so I think there are more people who don't identify as just one thing or just a handful of things, but have like kind of a spectrum approach to a lot of different identities. And that matters because we are building software for those people. And so, whereas before when we were building software was like very segmented areas of society with clear lines, now it's kind of, it's a spectrum of identities and people. And I think the software needs to address that as well. I know the one thing that I come up against a lot is that sometimes some systems they only accept a one word last name. My last name is 3 words,
Mm.
and that's only one of the last names. I actually changed my name just so I would only have my husband's last name instead of my middle name, my
And then,
mother, my, so in Filipino culture, you're supposed to have like your mother's maiden name, then your father's last name as your name. And when you get married, your mother's maiden name gets bumped off, and then your father's last name becomes your middle name, then you
yeah.
take your husband's name. Unfortunately, because I didn't get married in the Philippines, I got married in Australia. It's all messed up because you can't change your middle name just like that, just by getting married. You can only change your last name. So I had to do a whole name change. And then I got to the Netherlands, and in the Netherlands, you can't change your name, period.
Mm.
So it's so in forms sometimes I'm presented with one last name,
Yeah.
one word last name, and then it doesn't match my passport exactly because it's 3 words. So things like that, like we're the ones that are building and testing software. Let's try and make sure that it accounts for varying identities.
Yeah. And I remember as well that some countries, I've forgotten like which country in Asia, but most people, for example, they don't have last names as well. So if you um for example, like when you're testing software, if you just have that bias that yeah, everyone has their last name, so that field should always be filled in, then you're already missing like certain scenarios where, oh, what happens when you send this form but without someone's last name, because that is an actual use case. And you've probably missed out on like certain bugs just because of like certain views, like certain bias. So I totally agree. I think this really opens up your view on like different perspectives as well, which could be really useful, especially when we work in tech.
Did you hear about that one? I think it was, I'm not sure if it was a hand dryer or like a motion activated soap dispenser. And
Mhm.
it was installed in the women's bathroom, but they found out that it only could sense, because it had to do with light, and so it could only sense certain shades of human skin. It didn't do the full spectrum. So a black woman wouldn't her hand wouldn't be identified by the dispenser as existing. And
Mm.
so they couldn't like dry their hands or get soap, or I can't remember which one it was. So it's also an accessibility thing, right? It's making sure that whatever you build, it's going to be able to be used by lots of different kinds of people.
Yeah. Um, with our roles as well as developer advocates, because one thing that we do a lot is collaborating like with other people, and I think with intersectionality in play, it helps us because we make sure that we don't just collaborate with like a certain group. Like we try to get a lot of like other inputs as well from people. So one, I guess, way that we can try and amplify this is if we, I don't know, like for example, having this platform to raise like our voices, our experience, and also help like advocate not just women, but a lot of like minority groups out there, that there are a lot of areas in tech where you can like have a career on, not just, and we spoke about this on the last episode, that you don't just you don't just have to stick with one area in tech. Like we can try and go to different areas. So we're both initially software testers, and now we work as developer advocates. And I think just having that understanding that we need to also collaborate, not just with the people that we are don't that we associated with the most, that we are comfortable with the most, that we should also be collaborating with other people that we don't normally, I guess, try to interact with. Yeah.
Yeah, I do feel like that is one of the best, and I don't want to say worst, parts about being a developer advocate is that the best part, the good part is that I am aware that my mix of intersecting identities is an underrepresented voice, and I'm happy to be that voice and to have the platform to reach other people and express myself, and also maybe encourage others who are like me to do the same later on, or to go into tech or whatever.
Yeah.
But the hard part is that sometimes that becomes an obligation. Sometimes I feel like it's my duty to be out there, because I don't see other faces or other voices that are like mine. I almost feel like I say yes to more things than I normally would, just because I think it's a positive thing for the industry, but not necessarily always positive for me.
Yeah. I think, yeah, you've hit the nail on that one. We I guess it seems like we're trying to prove, something as well, that, we can, that, this are things that we can also do. But at the same time, that can, take a toll on yourself. It could be seen as, a positive thing, within the wider society, that we are doing these things. But if we're not very careful and we just say yes to everything that we collaborate with, then yeah, that can lead to another type of problem, which yeah, we just need to be careful about it.
So, what else do you think someone could do? Like someone who doesn't understand your circumstance, what
Yeah.
could they do to help you feel more comfortable?
I think having a really safe environment where you feel that, you know it's safe for you to share, like, stories. It's safe for you to bring your most authentic self, whether that's work, whether that's personal, whether that's like with social situations. I think that could really be really helpful. So I think the first thing as well that people probably need to do to help is, yep, understand or recognize what intersectionality is. Because I think, I don't know, maybe not a lot of people are still aware of what it is. Like I only found out about it, like very recently. So maybe the more people read more about it, and then once they have that understanding of what it is and why it's important, then they can try and promote like a safe environment, or be more welcoming, to hear more others, to hear other people's experiences. And I think this can help reduce like certain biases that they have to.
I think one thing is that maybe we could try not to assume. We all assume things, right? We all have stereotypes in our heads, because sometimes they're useful, but sometimes they can make people uncomfortable, like in the instance of somebody just assuming that you have a husband, or that you're still with the father of your daughter. Those can be hurtful assumptions, or can make you feel a little bit more uncomfortable. So I think it would be good if we could all just try to steer clear of assumptions, even things like assuming that someone is straight because they're straight presenting. That is an awkward conversation to have for the person who isn't straight, and then is faced with this decision of like, should I say something or should I let it go? And the other thing is to ask, right? But if you're not sure, it's totally fine to ask. I think we should normalize that. I think it's fine to ask. It's a good thing to ask someone for their pronouns. Or like if you're feeling like you're close enough to ask about their circumstances and be open to them not wanting to share, but also be open to them wanting to share. And then when people do the same to us, what we could do is to answer without anger, like
Yeah,
not to assume that people are out to get you or are trying to, be mean to you.
yeah,
Just start with the assumption that people generally mean well, but maybe are ignorant or just curious, you know, and maybe try and be a little bit more open to educating them or answering the question without resorting to anger.
yeah. I think a final one for me is, yeah, just try to expand, I guess, your circle a bit. So if you feel like, you're only collaborating, or you're only really, forming relationships with like a certain, group, or like a certain, representation, then maybe you can take baby steps, and okay, maybe next time you attend a conference, you try and approach, like, other people that doesn't really necessarily fit what you normally go for. So just, having that I guess view would already, like, improve it for you. Or like, maybe if your workplace has some sort of like, a fika, like virtual chat, you can try and because like sometimes they are random, but you can totally just, schedule like a coffee, or like a schedule a chat, with like someone that you don't really, like normally like talk to, and then just, yeah, get to know them. You don't have to be like best friends like with everyone, but yeah, it's just really getting to know them more, their situation, and yeah, how you can help them as well, like especially if you work in an environment where you want to raise their voice, especially in tech. Like, we know that there's still that underrepresentation of women in tech. So maybe you can, help raise other people's voices, and help them, with like certain other areas that they want help in terms of their careers.
Yeah, I think my final one would be to approach people with the right attitude. So even if you don't know like what pronouns you should use or what their circumstances are or whatever, just get the attitude right. And the attitude should be one of curiosity and empathy. And as long as that's what your intention is, I think you'll be fine.
Nice. So I think, yeah, it's time to wrap up this episode. Hopefully, this was really useful. And if you had no idea what intersectionality is in the first place, then hopefully this episode really, gave some, good insights as to what it is, and as to why it's important. So yeah, that's all from myself and Nicole. Any other last words, Nicole, from your side, or
No, that was it. Thank you for listening, and I guess we'll see you next time.
yeah,
Bye,
see you
everyone.
all. Bye.